Hi guys. Happy Juneteenth to everyone. My name is Julie O'Donohue. I am the senior writer for Louisiana Illuminator, and I'm a member of the Baton Rouge Press Club. Today our speaker is State Representative Royce Duplessis. He's a Democrat from New Orleans. He was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2018, and he's a graduate of Xavier University, and he got his law degree at Howard University. Representative Duplessis is on the House and Governmental Affairs Committee. He's the vice chairman and the ranking Democrat. And of course, there's been a lot going on with redistricting over the past, well, really the past few months, but particularly the last week or so. Representative Duplessis is one of the leading Democrats that works on those issues because of his position on this committee. So he's going to talk to us a little bit today about what happened over the weekend and what's been happening over the past couple months in terms of redistricting. Welcome, Representative Duplessis.
Thank you, Julie, and good afternoon. Hope y'all can hear me just fine. It's great to be with you all this afternoon, and it's certainly an honor and a privilege to have been invited to speak to you all. Now, since this is the press club, I'm assuming we're here to talk about my mugshot bill. Is that right, Julie?
Yes, let's talk about it.
Let's talk about mugshots. No, we're not going to talk about mugshots. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions y'all have about my mugshot bill, but we're going to talk a little bit about a subject area that when I signed up to run for public office, I never imagined that I would be so involved in issues around precincts, demographics, compactness, contiguity, split parishes, and all of these other things, all of these other criteria that we have to use around principles of redistricting, the Voting Rights Act, and the history of this state and how we go forward. But when I got appointed to House and Governmental last term, because I was elected at the end of the 2016 term, I was elected in 2018, so my committee assignments were different. But this was obviously a redistricting term, and just simply had no idea how much time this would take out of my life, personally and professionally. But I will tell you, it has been gratifying, despite how challenging it has been, to serve the people of District 93 in New Orleans, which I think is actually the best House district in the country. I really believe that. I'll tell you all the neighborhoods that's in it. You have the French Quarter, you have the 7th Ward, Treme, CBD, Warehouse District, Central City, Lower Garden District, Lower Mid-City. These are the neighborhoods I'm sure most of you all visit when you're in New Orleans. And I didn't grow up in any of these neighborhoods. So that's not a slight to my home, but I'm just incredibly privileged to represent such a remarkable district. And I got to really understand more about this state, traveling around the state through Redistricting Roadshow that we started last fall, beginning to appreciate all the differences of this state. Being a city boy, coming up in New Orleans, going to Monroe, going to Lake Charles, going to Alexandria, going to Shreveport, Thibodaux, Covington, all across the state. And if nothing else, going through this process has taught me certainly about the challenges that we have, but it's also taught me about a lot of what ties us together as a state, whether you're urban, whether you're rural, whether you're white, black, Republican, Democrat, Independent. We do have a lot in common, and I think redistricting is one of those central areas that sort of brings it all to a head. Because as a state, it makes us have to ask the question, because what is it based on? It's based on the census. And the census is based on what? Population. So the first question after we did the census was, did we increase or did we decrease? Well, we stayed pretty steady. We stayed pretty steady, which was a good thing in comparison to previous decades because we didn't lose any congressional seats. But unfortunately, we didn't grow tremendously either. Orleans Parish was the only real municipality. There was some growth on the North Shore, but we gained about 40,000 in Orleans Parish. But as a state, as a whole, we did not grow very much. And we have to be thinking about the next 10 years and what we're going to do to not remain stagnant. So that was one of my biggest takeaways from the redistricting process, is how do we move from being a place of stagnation? How do we attract more people to this state? Because that's what it's about at the end of the day. We need to be talking about not just how do we reconfigure 6 congressional districts, we need to be talking about how do we draw in a new 7th congressional districts, because we had 8 at one time, I mean, most recently, a few decades ago. So that was my biggest takeaway. Now, we've all been reading the news, and we've all been following what has taken place and where we are today. So what I'd like to do in the time that I've given is sort of give a recap from my perspective. So last fall, we started on what was called a road show. Talked about that already. Before the road show, though, I was on a panel. I was on a panel with Chairman John Stefanski, and former House Clerk Butch Spear. It was a cable panel. And I came to that panel, it was at the downtown Hilton, with every sense of optimism, and I just had all of the encouragement in the world coming into this process that we were going to take all of the public's feedback and we were going to do right by the people. We were going to have a process that honored the people. And Butch Spear turned and he just looked and he just kind of shook his head. And we were speaking specifically around the state, House, and Senate maps. And this is someone who's been around, I think, probably 40, 50 years, has been doing this stuff before I was born. And, he just kind of chuckled that, he's seen it before. And much of what he said, unfortunately, did come to fruition, that most of the process was one that it didn't really put the people first, in my opinion. When you talk about the state, House, and Senate maps, it certainly favored incumbency. I mean, I think that was pretty public and what was seen both publicly, and there's no secret about it. So I'm not saying anything that I don't think I'm violating any sort of rules or code. It's just the way the process worked out. And then I said this on a local LPB panel that we were on, that I've come from this process believing that certainly when it comes to the state, House, and Senate maps, the maps that we draw for ourselves, I think an independent commission would better serve us. Because if I'm drawing a map for myself, my personal district, it just adds, it complicates things. It really, really does, in a way that I think an independent panel could remove some of that. So I can't say, though, however, I was very surprised with the outcome. We've been at this for a few times now. There's been a few iterations. We started the redistricting process formally in February. It's about a 3-week session, 2 or 3 week session, I want to say. After doing the road show, after taking all of that public input, one of the big overarching comments that we heard on the road show was that people wanted a second black congressional district. I went back and I looked at videos from 10 years ago when former chair Rick Gallo, who's now the president of Grambling State University, he was the chair of House and Governmental Affairs. Some of the same testimony that we heard this year, we heard 10 years ago. Oftentimes some of the same people. So there wasn't much surprise there. But what I will say is I did find it surprising what I perceived just to be a pure lack of intention, a pure lack of desire by leadership and those who have the numbers to determine certain outcomes on pushing for changes in the maps. We were fortunate on the state level, on the state House level, to pick up a new seat in Orleans Parish because the numbers called for it. We had about 40,000 people, as I mentioned, to come to Orleans Parish. We lost about 100,000 after Katrina, but we gained about 40,000 over the last 10 years. So that was sort of inevitable. So we got that district. But outside of that, there was really not a push for a whole lot of change. And I think that's unfortunate. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I go through my comments. Now, everyone in this room has heard time and time again, and you're probably sick of hearing it, that 1/3 of 6 is 2, right? Say it one more time. 1/3 of 6 is 2. And we have to keep repeating that math equation because it seemingly continues to fall on deaf ears. Now, it's not just purely a numerical equation. It's not just purely numerical, even though it's driven by the numbers. But there are also legal principles that have to be complied with. Despite the fact that the Voting Rights Act was weakened several years ago, almost a decade ago now, it wasn't struck down. There is still a Voting Rights Act. There is still Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which has to be adhered to. So we might not be under preclearance, but we still have certain requirements that tie us back to the inception of the Voting Rights Act to begin with. And that means that we cannot dilute votes. So the fact that you have 1/3 of this state that only has 17% of representation in Congress, that is voter dilution. It's just a fact. But if you want to flip it and talk about the fact that whites make up 57% of the state, but represent 83% in Congress, there also lies a problem. So the question is, how do we get there? I don't pretend that it's easy, because one of the primary factors is compactness. The districts have to be compact. The districts have to be contiguous. But over the course of the redistricting process, we introduced several maps that laid out compact districts that met all of the criteria to draw that second district, but all of those districts were ignored. In fact, the districts that we introduced, when I say we, members of the Black Caucus, we laid it out. Those districts, those maps were better. They were better on all of the redistricting principles than the map that was ultimately adopted. That was a map by Senate Chairwoman Sharon Hewitt and Speaker Schexnayder. So I want to go back to these numbers, and I feel like many of my colleagues, not all, but maybe I'll say some of my colleagues, I think along the way sometimes would take offense or be upset when I would give that mathematical equation that, 1/3 of 6 is 2. And I say, well, it's not that simple. Well, it actually is that simple. But, when you tie it back to the challenges that we face as a state, this is something that I didn't say when I had the opportunity, because I kind of wanted to just keep it on message and focus on redistricting. But going back to the challenges that we face as a state and why, when you have underrepresentation in Congress, why it's so important, because we have 1/3 out of 6 of the state, 1/3 of the population African American in the state. But 2/3 of the prison population is made up of African Americans. 2/3 of the prison population is African American. Now, we can get into a whole nother conversation about that. But I think it's all connected. I really, really believe it's all connected. And we can't adequately address the challenges that we face as a state until we have proper and adequate representation. When I bring up issues around criminal justice, well, the response is, well, they should just follow the law. That's where we are now in 2022. It's not racial. It's just you follow the law or you don't follow the law. If you follow the law, you won't go to prison. You won't follow, you won't end up in jail. Well, I find irony in that, because we were given a very clear directive from a federal court very recently to come up with a map that has 2 majority-minority congressional districts. And it was very clear from the outset that there was zero intention to follow the law. Well, there was zero intention to follow the law before we even got to federal court. I think that part was very clear. In fact, everything that went into the process was all done for the purpose of this being resolved in court. It was done for the purpose of being resolved by a conservative, either U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals or United States Supreme Court. It's not a secret. It's very clear, very, very, very transparent about that. So how do you operate in a space where you don't have the numbers, number one, to get the bills you want done, the majority, and those in the majority have made a decision, either at the advice of attorneys who are being paid $60,000 a month with taxpayer dollars, who myself and Representative LaFleur, we don't even have the opportunity to speak to, right? They're being paid $60,000 a month to say, well, this is how we're going to go about it. I don't think that's good for our state, but that's where we are today. So the maps are ultimately passed, and the first veto override that this state has seen probably since this Constitution was adopted took place on this particular bill, on the congressional bill that was adopted. They overrode the governor on the veto, and I think that's very telling too, that there have been other attempts and a lot of other bad bills that were vetoed by the governor, at least from my vantage point, but the legislature did not muster up the votes or the willpower or desire to override the governor until this particular bill. Think about that. That speaks to how important this matter is and all of the underlying implications. So after the veto, immediately litigation was filed, a lawsuit was filed, and Judge Shelley Dick in the Middle District, after a week-long trial, struck the maps down as being unconstitutional. I had been saying the map was unconstitutional. Several of my colleagues had been saying the map was unconstitutional. But it wasn't even simply because it didn't have a second black congressional district. It was because we didn't even try. We didn't even try. And that part was very obvious, that there was really no intent, there was no effort, there was no desire, there was no will to even try to draw a second black district. And I'm sure when we get into Q&A, we can talk about some of the reasons why that may have been. Certainly there's racial, it's all racial, but it's political as well. And when I say racial, that's not an accusatory term of saying you're a racist, but this is all very racial. Because throughout the entire redistricting process, the overriding theme was race. That's all we discussed. So we can't say that this process wasn't a racial process, because that's literally all we talked about throughout redistricting was race. I have to say how things played out towards the end were incredibly and continue to be incredibly troubling from just the standpoint of when the judge ordered us to come back in and draw a second map, which was followed by the governor doing an official call to get the legislature in to draw a map by the 20th. That's what the judge gave us in order to do. Today's the 20th. Immediately upon us being ordered to come in here, and we're coming here, go in the legislature and draw a map, leadership says, well, we don't have enough time. We don't have enough time to draw a second map. So I immediately raised my hand. I said, we have enough time. Why? Because I have a map right here for you. We're going to make it real easy for you. Senator Fields filed the same map on the Senate side. We pre-filed the bills. We wanted to make sure we got them in as early as we practically could. But on the first day, when we get into session, we're told that this is a Wednesday, this is last Wednesday, we're told that the House will not meet on a Thursday. So I asked the Speaker, well, why we're not meeting on a Thursday? And I was told that, well, number one, this isn't the Senate, this is the House. But I was given the reason that we weren't meeting on Thursday was for transparency purposes, so that the public could have an opportunity to review the maps, which I always think that's a good thing. We shouldn't be trying to rush anything through, but we have also been given an order to get this done by the 20th. So this is a much different process than any other typical legislative session, because we've been ordered by a court to do something by a certain date. So I think that was kind of step one in terms of showing that we were not going to be really moving to try to follow the court's order. And I'm going to come back to that transparency conversation too, because I think it's a perfect kind of dovetail to how we ended the session. But the other piece is that, just like I mentioned, I filed a bill and Senator Fields filed a bill. The Speaker also filed a bill, and the Senate committee chairwoman also filed the bill. But wouldn't you know that they both filed the exact same bill that was struck down by the court as being unconstitutional? So here you have a federal district court judge that says the maps you all adopted is unconstitutional, and the two authors of those bills turn around and literally file the exact same map. So I think that again shows where we were headed from the outset, that there was no real intent there to even try. So it wasn't really about whether we had the time or not, because we had enough time. We took off Thursday, we ended on Saturday, and here it is Monday. We could still be working if that's what we wanted to do. When, as I mentioned, the map that I provided and the map that Senator Fields provided was a better map on all redistricting criteria than the map that was ultimately adopted. I'm gonna tie it back to what I mentioned earlier about when I started on the road show, going from corner to corner throughout this state. The implications of this decision are so crucial to the future of this state, because what we've chosen to do as a legislature, in my opinion, is that we have said to the rest of the state, and we've said to the rest of the world, that we like things the way that they are. We don't want to change. And this is not a place for any future progression. The fact that we're dead last in everything good, and the fact that we're number one in everything bad, by choosing and making these sorts of decisions, we are sending the message, a very clear one, that we like things the way that they are. Why would young people from other parts of the country look at Louisiana and say, I think that's a place where I want to go and raise my family? Why would a business say, I think that's a place where I think we should bring more businesses and more jobs, when we're still making decisions like this? Some of the testimony I heard in committee was pretty moving, and I want to share a quote that was shared by a brilliant activist. I consider him to be a brilliant activist, but Devontae Lewis, he had just come from Memphis, and he visited the Civil Rights Museum, and he talked about how on the day in which we gavelled in for the special redistricting session last week, he was at the Civil Rights Museum, and he walked and he saw a quote from Bull Connor that said, "Damn the law. Damn the law. We make our own law." And that message was very clear throughout this redistricting process, that we don't care what a federal judge tells us to do. It's Louisiana. We're going to do what we want to do. We're going to defy the law. And it made me think about my mom when I was a youngster, and I didn't listen. She said, "Son, you deliberately disobeyed me." That was her thing. And I reminded her that. She said, "I never used to say that." I said, "That's all you used to say. You deliberately disobeyed me. You knowingly and you willfully and intentionally disobeyed me." So we're either going to follow the law or we're not going to follow the law. We don't get to pick and choose. And the legislature chose not to follow the law. And it makes me think about where we are politically in this nation. We have former presidents who want to disregard election results. I mean, does anything matter anymore? Federal judge tell you what to do? No, just doesn't matter. Although I do think that if the federal judge had said something different, then we would be in direct compliance with the law. So me and Rep. LaFleur, we show up, we say, wait, let's appeal it. Let's see what the Fifth Circuit has to say. Let's see what the Supreme Court has to say. They say, no, the federal judge has ruled on this. The judge has spoken, right? So that's where we are, y'all. And I think, look, the press, y'all are smart. Y'all see it for what it is. I'm not telling y'all anything you don't know, or anything you don't cover from day in and day out. But the question, I think, has to be, where does this stop? Because we're supposed to be the ones to honor, uphold, and respect the law. That's what we raise our hands to do when we take an oath. that we're going to honor the Constitution. But we as lawmakers are simply saying we're not even going to comply with the law. And I wish that what I was saying was opinion, but I mean, this is all fact. I'm not sharing my opinion. I'm just sharing with you the facts that we have decided to be the Louisiana of the past and not be a progressive Louisiana of the future. It's not about us all agreeing on everything, but these types of decisions are, I think, directly in line with what has led us to where we are today, which has been a state of stagnation, a state that after 10 years, we can't look to growth and we can't be fighting over, okay, where are we going to draw the new district? Where are we going to draw a new district? Because we got so much population that people want to come to Louisiana. We're saying, no, things, we like the way things are. 1/3 of the state, African-American. I mean, there's a member on the committee who was arguing with me about whether or not it was even 33%. What? Like, I mean, the actual numbers that we're working with clearly say 33%. And we all know that there was an undercount, but let's take the undercount out of it, right? Like, forget about the undercount. The actual numbers in which we are working with clearly say 33%, but we have members, not just in the body, but on the committee, who are saying it's not even 31%. I mean, it's not even 33%. What? So now we're not even agreeing on facts, okay? How do you explain that to children? How do you explain that to young people? Very, very challenging, I must say. And I'm not sure where I am on time, but I'll wrap it up on a point I mentioned earlier around the issue of transparency. I thought it was very, very ironic that on the first day when I asked the question about why we were not meeting on Thursday, that it was because of transparency. It was because, well, we need time to let the public review the maps. Well, I'm all about transparency, and I think it's a great thing. I think it's a great disinfectant. Sunshine is a great disinfectant, and it helps the process. So I'm trying to understand, and maybe you all as the press may have some thoughts on this or some opinions, but I'm trying to understand why on the last day, when we were clearly about to end the process, because we didn't have enough time, so we ended 2 days early, after only working 2 days. Since we didn't have enough time on the last day, when I know at least 5 members of the Black Caucus had their personal privilege buttons pushed, that we were told only one person was going to be able to speak. And when that speech began, the live camera feed broadcast was cut. Transparency. Transparency. I can't answer that question. It's a question that I have, and I really honestly hope it's one that the press club and those who work in the press can help us all get an answer to. Because I'm not joking when I say that I think transparency is a good thing. So why members of a body, a legislative body, would be denied the opportunity just to speak on behalf of their constituents? The speaker tweeted right before all of this went down, I think it was the day my bill was in committee, to vote your conscience, vote your district. Well, you know, I really have to question anyone whose conscience tells them we should deny people representation in Congress. If that's what your conscience tells you, you know, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure how that works. And this again was not about our conscience. This was about a judge telling us that we have to come up with a map that has 2 black districts. So there wasn't a whole lot of conscience, as far as I'm concerned, that really factored into this. We got it wrong. We got it wrong as a legislature. And the judge told us that we got it wrong. Now, if the Fifth Circuit makes a different decision in a couple of weeks, then that's going to be up to the Fifth Circuit. But as of now, we are in violation of a court order. Y'all heard what the judge said. I was sitting in the front row. And I heard her when she said it. I watched her when she told the speaker how she felt. Y'all saw the quotes. I don't have to repeat those adjectives. So she's not messing around. And I think we have to respect the process. And when the Fifth Circuit ultimately rules on this, however they may rule, we're going to have to respect the process. But to undermine the process in the way that we have, I think we've done ourselves an incredible disservice. And my hope, because you have to stay hopeful in this work, my hope is that the courts do rule on the right side of the law. Because as a body, I will tell you, we are currently on the wrong side of the law, and we're on the wrong side of history. But my hope is that, however the courts rule, that we can learn and grow from this as a legislature, because we still have a lot of work to do together. We still have a lot of problems to solve. But I will tell you, this has been a particularly challenging one. And you know, I'm confident that we have made a record that will be pretty compelling in court. I really believe that, which is why the district court ruled the way that they did, and which is why the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said that this is not going to be a slam dunk for the defendants, that there's a chance that they could lose. Now, they say that there were some weaknesses in the plaintiff's case, too. But I think that if you just do all of the measurements and try to take the politics out of it, just try for a second, if it's looked at purely on the merits of the law, I feel very confident that the court process will play out favorably. So that's what we are, redistricting 2022 in Louisiana. I think this is going to determine a lot for our future in terms of where it goes. But I'll end with this: regardless of how the courts rule, if they do rule, if the appellate court rules on the side of the plaintiffs, because Judge Dick is now going to draw a map. She's going to draw the map with the second district. And if the appellate courts uphold that map, that will continue a legacy in this state, a consistent history whereby representation, justice, and advancements for black people in particular, but I'll say all minorities, but black people in particular, has come as a result of federal intervention. It's come as a result of a court having to say, you have to do this. Not because we just became so enlightened and said, this is the right thing to do, but because we were forced to do it. So while that would be progress, how sad is that? I'm sorry, Cherie. She told me to try to stay positive. But I'm still hopeful. I'm still hopeful because if history is any guide, we do know that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But it doesn't do it on its own. It doesn't do it on its own. And my hope is that the press can join in that fight towards justice. Not saying you have to take a position, but raise the questions. You know, push us, make us answer the tough questions. You know, challenge us on these issues, because I do believe that at the end, you know, truth and justice, they bear out in the end. So with that, happy to answer any questions y'all may have. Thank y'all so much for having me. Julie.
So the recent fight in the court decision was about the congressional districts. Of course, the legislature also redrew legislative maps. I'm not going to get into the PSC or DESI, but how do you feel? I mean, there's been a challenge to the legislative maps too, right? A lot of people don't feel like there are enough majority-minority seats in the legislature's maps too. Do you feel like this decision by Judge Dick has any bearing on how you feel like those challenges will go to those maps as well?
I do. I do actually, and I appreciate you pointing that out, because in this whole conversation around redistricting, most of the conversation ends up being on the congressional maps, but the underrepresentation in state, House, and Senate maps is just as egregious. You know, we're underrepresented in the House, we're underrepresented in the Senate, so I do think that there will be some bearing, but I don't want to speak to that litigation right now, but I do think that there will be some bearing there. We just have to see how that plays out. But I'll just say this from a practical standpoint, that drawing those smaller districts should, because one of the big things we get in terms of pushback is, well, yeah, the state is 1/3 African American. Those who want to agree and say that it's 1/3 African American, they'll say, well, yeah, but they're all spread out, and it's not easy to draw the districts in a compact manner where they're not gerrymandered and ultimately struck down. I think that the state House and Senate maps should not be as challenging in doing so, because they're, smaller. That's just my take on it, but I do think it will have some bearing in the end.
Yeah, I think for people in the room, I felt like Representative Glover made a pretty compelling argument just about Shreveport and how you could move lines around in Shreveport to get more majority minority districts, or even just more districts that were a little bit more racially balanced.
Absolutely. You have some districts up in that area that were packed, and are pretty high in terms of black population. That hurts everybody, because it just hyper politicizes everything. The type of candidates you get in all of those surrounding districts, it just makes things more extreme. So he brought some really great amendments during the House map redistricting process that unfortunately were shot down. But I'm hoping that we can get some attention there as well. Will?
Is it your opinion that the leadership never had any interest in a second majority black congressional district throughout the process, including the special session, because they are confident either the Fifth Circuit and on the state court will uphold what the legislature already passed?
That is my opinion. That is my clear opinion. However, I want to address one word that you used. You said confident. I don't know that they're fully confident, but I do think they're willing to take their chances. So the first half of your question, yes, absolutely. There was no desire or intent, and they're willing to just simply take their chances in court. But as I pointed out, I think it came as a big surprise to many when the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals administrative panel did not uphold the stay. So, but regardless, that was not enough to overcome their willingness to roll the dice in court, which I think is a very bad decision.
Is it possible for either you or Phil Fields to get your maps onto the radar between now and Wednesday if she starts all the maps, or do that, or how does that work?
Well, they're already in the public domain, and I think she's going to hire a special master, but our maps they've been in the public domain. We've put several iterations of these maps out there since February. However, the maps we filed very intentionally this past session were what was described to us as the best maps in terms of all of the criteria. So it's certainly my hope that those maps, and it's just one map, one was filed on the House side, one on the Senate side, so it's the same map, but it's our hope that that map be taken into consideration.
I'm not trying to monopolize anything, but I'm curious, can you comment on how you felt about Senator Rick Ward's maps, which was two districts that were barely majority minority, like 50-point-something%?
So I think, I really do think, I don't want to, this is a question where I'm not as confident in the intent. No, it wasn't about Senator Ward, who I've really enjoyed working with, and I will miss him. But I do think, I don't think that there was really ever any intent to pass that bill. There was a lot of conversation around it, and I at the end of the day, I kind of feel like it was a stall tactic to maybe show the court that there was some effort made, but I don't think that there was any real legitimate effort to push that bill. We gave them the bills that they could have moved on, and all of these other comments that were coming up around split parishes, people saying, well, we may have two congresspeople. I mean, if you have two congresspeople fighting for you, that's going to help you back home. I mean, the last time I checked. But, all of these issues were being raised, but I don't think there was ever any real intent to pass those maps, or Senator Ward's map.
Question a
I think it depends. And I think that every area is different. Come to where I live in New Orleans, right? There's some differences there in terms of how we vote. Because it's not so much about race as much as it's about political interests. And it's about communities having the ability to select, not guarantee, but the opportunity to vote for a candidate of choice. That's the threshold for me. So whether it's 50 plus 1 or whether it's 52 or 53, it really could vary depending on that community, which is why they do these voter polarization analysis. So I think it just depends. You have to look at the history of communities and how they vote, whether they're going to block vote, whether white voters are going to block vote and say, look, Royce, we don't, there's just no chance that you can get elected here, so don't waste your time, versus whether or not there's been a history to show that there's some willingness to consider candidates of another color or race. I think it all factors in, but obviously 50.1 is I think it's the minimum because that's what you need to win. But there have been examples of being less than that where people are willing to vote and crossover. I think it depends on the community. Yes, sir.
It's a shame I don't know the answer to the question, but maybe you do. Are there any other states in the Fifth Circuit that the Fifth Circuit would be considering the same kind of challenges that they're doing in Louisiana?
Yeah.
Consolidated.
I'm not sure where the other states are in their processes as it relates to the Fifth Circuit in particular. So I can't speak to whether or not any of those cases will be consolidated. And each case, we saw what occurred with Alabama, but that case was not ruled or decided by the Supreme Court on the merits. It was sent back largely because of the time in which that race, qualifying around that race. So I really can't speak to where any other states are in terms of how it will factor in, but it appears as though, depending on when our case, if it makes it to the Supreme Court, if they choose to hear it, it would likely be the case that directs a lot of these cases throughout the country in terms of how we interpret the Voting Rights Act in 2022. Yeah. Barbara, you don't have any questions for me? I really want to acknowledge my colleague, Representative Barbara Freiberg, who's here today. And I appreciate you and your voice and your willingness to listen and be a thoughtful leader. And I also want to give a special shout out to, you're the newest member of the House, aren't you, Rep. LaFleur? Yeah, you're the Representative Vanessa LaFleur, who I also really, really enjoy serving with. They're both from the Baton Rouge area. And I believe together we're going to do some good things for this state if we can ever get through redistricting. I appreciate y'all taking the time out today to be here. I really do appreciate and respect y'all. Thank y'all. All right. Oh, I think we have another question.
Yeah, I didn't want to pull away from the state.
Yeah.
But, we've seen locally here in East Baton Rouge Parish that the school board maps have been overturned. We have our first redistricting workshop, well not first, but our third redistricting workshop on Wednesday for the Metro Council. And some of the things that we've seen is that the minorities are the majority for both the city and the parish, but the other minorities are lumped into the majority to create majority districts. So I'm just going to ask, what advice do you have moving forward that would help East Baton Rouge Parish and the city of Baton Rouge not face some of those same stumbling blocks that y'all are facing state wide?
So what's the current makeup of the council right now? Y'all have how many members?
So right now it is 5 to 7.
Okay.
The way that you can look at it two ways.
5 to 7, which way?
So 7 Republicans, 5 Democrats.
Okay.
Or 5
7
minorities,
okay.
7 majority.
Uh-huh.
And if you lump all the minorities together, it puts us at about, I believe the numbers are 7.2.
You mean minority like black plus Asian or Hispanic?
Plus, correct.
Okay.
And if you separate that, it puts us right at about, I believe, don't quote me on the numbers, but I believe right at about 6 point whatever. So it should be almost an even makeup. So that's where we are.
So, great question. I don't know all of the inner workings, all of the local politics as it relates to the council, which is kind of why I wanted to just get an understanding of where you all were numbers-wise, because in order to do anything, you need the numbers. to pass anything. But certainly you want to engage with not just the community who's pushing for fair maps and fair representation, but I would imagine y'all are engaged, that there's going to be somebody watching what's going on in the event that there are any challenges legally. Because if this representation is the way that you describe it, where minorities make up the majority of the parish, but it's lopsided the way you just described it on the council, that's a problem. And I think it's very parallel to the legislature. The minorities don't make up the majority of the state, but make up a third of the state, and it's not in any way represented in Congress, right? So I think there are similar arguments there. So you want to, make sure that those issues are being raised. And again, it's not necessarily being like guaranteeing an election or like flipping the council. It's about people of minority communities having the voice, having the opportunity to select a candidate of choice. That's really what it's about. Voter dilution, breaking up communities. It really does hurt all of us. But in this business, numbers and power and influence is what drives pretty much, whether it's said publicly or not, drives a lot of this. So, just continue to make every argument, make them answer every question when it's raised as to, okay, why are we ignoring this group over here, because they're being lumped in on this side. And it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done at the council level for y'all's redistricting process. Thankfully, in Orleans, we didn't have as many challenges because Orleans is just a little different politically, and that's why I go back to the question earlier. It's really, every community has its differences, but you certainly want to make sure that you're working with some of these experts who know about redistricting litigation and who've done it at the local level, because I would hate that y'all would have to go there, but it's probably a likelihood that's where y'all are going to be headed. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And I was told by Julie that everyone here who works in the press is going to take a very good photo of me, and it's going to be the only photo of me you have in your stockpile. So whenever you publish something that involves me, it won't be any weird facial expression. It's going to be the best photo literally ever taken, and that's whether it's a good story or a bad story. It's going to be accompanied by literally the best. It's the only photo. All right. Thank y'all so much.
I wanted to mention, I forgot